Welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. Joining me right now live is Dom Smith, football reporter for The Standard. He's on to share his thoughts on what Fulham have done and what they haven't done so far in the transfer window. And I only have Dom on for a short period of time, so I'm just going to just get going and just ask him questions to get started. Dom, first of all, welcome so much for joining me again. You were on last season. I look forward to speaking with you tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Really happy to be back.
Okay, great. So let's not waste any time. The big news for us happened this morning. Again, I'll ask you about Tom Kearney afterwards, but I think this is a massive deal for Fulham. Josh King signs a new contract until the summer of 2029. Here's a player that, again, an academy player coming through, been with Fulham for a very long period of time, and they just re-upped him for the foreseeable future, like I said, until 2029. I think this is a big deal for Fulham Football Club. Your thoughts?
I would definitely agree. I think that last season was a breakout season for Josh King, definitely. I mean, he made, I think, 11 appearances, 8 of which came in the Premier League, made his first Premier League starts as well. And at only 18 years old, that's a good age to be playing that much Premier League football. I think his future in the medium term was probably already secure at Fulham, but to sign him to new terms on a 4-year deal to 2029 is a really important move from Fulham. And although it's probably not as much of a feel-good story as Tom Kearney staying, it's probably a more important one in terms of Fulham's future, I think. I think he's a really important player, and I think he deserves the new and improved. My understanding is that he'll have a higher wage and better personal terms on this deal, which I think many people would have expected, and which he absolutely deserves. And I think he's going to stay with the first team next season. That's my understanding, and that he'll get more opportunities than the 11 games he played last season.
Well, that was going to be my next question. That leads me to exactly what I was thinking, Dom. He played limited minutes last season with Fulham, and I was clamoring along with several of my co-hosts. We wanted to see more. So is this an indicator that he'll have a more significant role this season? It sounds like you believe that.
I think so. I don't think that there are there's any movement in terms of Fulham bringing in another senior midfielder as it stands. They may do, but certainly I think they're quite happy in defensive midfield with the partnership that built last season between Sander Berge and Sasha Lukic as well. So I think that in midfield, there is definitely the space for some more game time for Josh King. But also, even if there weren't, I think that Marco Silva would be trying to give him more minutes than he did last season. He really made an effort, the manager, last season, I think, to give Josh King minutes. So I think he would continue to up that this season, because that's really important for a player's progression when they're in these decisive years of their career.
Oh, I totally agree, Dom. And I guess I understand. I've heard from a source or two that's told me that Fulham are just trying to be careful when it comes to a young player of the talent of Josh King. I understand that. But at some point, when do you just let him loose? When do you throw him in the deep end? Or do you continue this gradual process of playing him a little bit more this season, then maybe more next season?
Well, when you say throwing him in the deep end more regularly, I think the player has to be of a similar level to the other players he's in competition for game time for before you throw them in the deep end. You wouldn't throw an 18-year-old in more regularly than you have been if they're miles off the level of Sasha Lukic and Sander Berge. And I don't think he is miles off, but he is some way worse than those sorts of players, and maybe someone like Andreas Pereira as well. So I think it'll take a while before he's getting regular starts week in, week out, sort of someone you expect to be in the starting lineup. But I think he will be in the starting lineup more than he was last season, and I think many Fulham fans would want to see that. But it is a gradual thing, and when you're 18, your body hasn't quite necessarily built up in the same way that it has if you're a 24-year-old. So I think it's going to take time, but certainly his career progression is faster than a lot of players. Certainly he's the most exciting product the club have produced for a long time. So I think he's doing very well, and that's proved by the new contract.
Okay. All right. Very good there. All right. Let's follow that up. You've already mentioned Tom Kearney. I want to get your thoughts on Tom Kearney signing a new one-year deal. I actually think this is good business for the club, Dom. I think they should be going year by year with Kearney. I don't think that they should give him a longer term than a year. But I think he still has something to offer. We talked about this a couple of episodes ago, that not just on the pitch, but I think as a mentor, as maybe like another coach to a player like Josh King. Josh King has already talked about Kearney's influence. So I think having him around is a huge positive for Fulham this season.
Yeah, some nice quotes from Josh King with regard to Tom Kearney sticking around. I mean, Tom Kearney did become a free agent for a couple of weeks, didn't he? Because his contract expired at the end of June, and so he was really an unattached player for a short while. But in that time, we know towards the end of the season, he had some interest from Wrexham, who wanted to make him one of their more experienced and higher paid players as they move up another division. And we know that he had some interest from West Ham. That's my understanding, that they were considering that. But I think a number of clubs would have continued to consider Tom Kearney if he didn't sign this new deal. But as it happened, Fulham and him had been working on terms for a decent amount of time. And I think there was confidence on both sides that it was going to happen at some point. It just depended what terms. I think those terms we're talking about maybe are based on pay and based on the length of the deal. But let's be honest, it does feel very, very standard that the deal he's signed is a 1-year one. It feels that he's got enough to offer, despite being 34, that he's worth keeping on. But maybe that he's coming into the winter of his career, and so a 2-year deal maybe for a Premier League club on his wages maybe isn't quite such a good investment. So 1 year, I think, suits all parties. And I think it's important to just give them another midfield option for the season ahead, especially because we think that Harrison Reed, there's a chance, might leave this summer potentially.
Right. And this is interesting. My friend Black, White, and Fred says, makes sense for this year, for the growing of or passing of the baton to King from Kearney. There's a Goldman for you. Very good there, Black, White, and Fred. I do agree with that. All right, my friend, let's move on. And there is some transfer speculation. The thing that's been driving us all crazy, Dom, as Fulham supporters, is that especially lately, there really has been very little in regards to transfer speculation. Not much at all. But the player that I'm going to ask you about right now, there actually was prior, and it's back. This one makes sense. I've been reading that there could be a lot of smoke with bringing back Reece Nelson, potentially on loan, maybe with an option to buy. I think this is another move for me. If they can make it happen, it would make sense, not just for Fulham, but also for Arsenal.
Well, this is a transfer. This is a transfer situation that I've been keeping my eye on since before he even returned back to Arsenal to complete. Because if you remember, he was still on loan at Fulham when he returned to Arsenal's training ground to continue some of his rehabilitation after his injury. And I suspected, and I think probably a lot of people suspected, that there was potentially going to be interest in him again from Fulham. It just made sense as a transfer that they might consider again. And certainly, I think Fulham, certainly the board, were impressed enough with the performances he did put in that they were maybe moved to try and consider an option of bringing him back in. I don't think it would be a permanent transfer according to the conversations that are currently being had. I think it would be a loan move. But I do think it's one that Fulham have been mulling over for some weeks, and I'm sure that Reece Nelson himself would be very interested in coming back. I think he was pretty impressive for Fulham. I think of one match which I was at last season, which was the 2-1 win over Brentford at home when the two late goals came from, I think, Harry Wilson. And he was very impressive in that match. And it wasn't his only impressive performance. No. So I think if he could come in, I understand that the fan base could be split on whether he can stay fit, but that's a consideration when you sign a player, but it can't be your primary consideration. Your primary consideration has to be, are you going to get value for money? And if you're not spending permanent money, transfer fee on a player, you're just spending Reece Nelson's wages, and he's not on ridiculous wages, then I think it feels to me a deal that could well happen, and one that I think would be one that makes sense for Fulham.
I think it makes sense. I think it also, again, makes sense for the player. But what do you make of, listen, Fulham have signed several Arsenal players. Is that a factor in this? We're talking about Emile Smith-Rowe, Alex Iwobi, and maybe their chemistry that I saw it last season, the three of them together. Is that just an added bonus, or there's something to that?
I think that the clubs have very good relationships. I think all of those bigger London clubs always try and have good relationships with the slightly lesser London clubs. And I'm not saying that Fulham are a small club, but they're a lesser club than Arsenal.
Right.
And I think that those clubs always try and have good relationships, because a player may not want to leave by choice the capital city. And so if you can go and get game time at another club in the capital, it can be a good way of Arsenal moving a player on that they don't want, and a player being okay with the solution. And certainly Reece Nelson feels a good example of that. But also someone like Bernd Leno, Alex Iwobi, these sorts of players.
I forgot Bernd Leno, yeah.
Yeah, and Emil Smith-Rowe as well, are players who maybe didn't want to leave the capital, certainly wouldn't have wanted to leave the Premier League, and both of those boxes are ticked if they join Fulham. Another box that's ticked, of course, is game time, and you're going to get more game time at Fulham per se than you are at Arsenal. And I think that's probably true for Reece. Well, it's certainly true for Reece Nelson. So I think let's keep an eye on this transfer, because I think it's probably one that could happen.
Okay, and I think so as well. I will ask you about another Arsenal player that Fulham will link to, I want to say about a month ago, along with Reece Nelson, was Zinchenko. Not heard anything recent. What are you hearing about him?
Well, I'm not sure about Fulham specifically, but I know that Arsenal are trying to get him sold this summer. If not sold, then the very, very worst case scenario would be loaned out. But they do want to move him on. He's an experienced Premier League player. Not many players have had the experience of playing for Arsenal and Manchester City in the last few years, and he's someone who has. So he's got top Premier League experience. Fulham have got spaces at fullback, haven't they? I mean, they've not got, they don't need to bring in fullbacks, but they've certainly got space to add another one. And he's certainly an option who can play on the left or the right. And as we know, he can play in midfield as well. Although I don't think Fulham would probably use him like that necessarily. One that I could imagine, but nothing that I've heard at the moment, other than I know that Arsenal are trying to get rid of him.
Okay, excellent. All right. Couple more things. Like I said, I'm glad that you could join me, talk a little bit about some transfer speculation. Here's the big one. I mentioned to you this off air, and this has been a big topic for us. Fulham are the only Premier League side right now, Dom, to not have signed any new player. They've signed their own players. We already talked about Kearney, King. I could also talk about Luke de Figueroles. They have signed their own players, but no new players. What do you make of this?
Well, you should also mention Kenny Tete,
that's right. Kenny Tete.
I think he might be the most important of Fulham's own players to have signed, in your words, this summer. But yeah, my understanding is that Fulham are not in a state of panic. I've been told that Fulham's strategy this summer is actually quite similar to previous summers, and in fact January's. I mean, many Fulham fans watching this will know that a lot of the business that the club does is towards the end of a transfer window, and they're not the only club that operates in that way. Manchester United operate in that way. Arsenal sometimes operate in that way. Crystal Palace definitely operate in that way. And it's where you want to sometimes leave the market until right at the end, where you have maximum information and where you potentially have maximum bargaining power. As long as you keep your position as the person in control of the situation, you are of maximum information at the end of a transfer window. And that is how Fulham have operated. Some of their best deals in recent years have come through towards the end of windows. I'm pretty sure that Alex Iwobi was a deadline day signing.
Yeah, he was. Absolutely.
It didn't work out well, but there was certainly there was certainly method behind the signing of Armando Broja. I know that it ended up being a terrible signing, but it made sense when it happened. The signing of Broja, and that was another deadline day signing. In fact, I think they needed a deal sheet to get it through. It's something like 2 a.m. in the morning.
I remember that.
Yeah. I'm not saying it will be that late again.
Oh, please no.
But I don't think it matters too much that Fulham are the last Premier League club to have signed a player this summer, because when in the summer you sign your players, it all depends on situation by situation. It's a case by case thing. And I think Fulham will sign players. They're in a good situation in terms of PSR. They've got good finances. There could be a first team sale or two. I could imagine Harrison Reed leaving, potentially Andres Pereira, although Fulham won't want to lose him necessarily. But yeah, players could leave, but I think players will join as well. Definitely.
Okay, excellent. All right. I do have a question. This is from Colin Bugler, and this is something you and I talked about off air, and you said you would share what you've learned. Jack Kelly actually just tweeted out, a journalist, that Fulham are paraphrasing, still feeling confident that he's going to return to the club. What are you hearing on Seth Ridgen? Again, another young player with a lot of talent.
Yeah, I mean, more and more these days, academy, the top academy players will wait till the summer and their agents will choose where to take them next. And it feels as though Seth Ridgen is one of those players who could have interest from clubs just as big as Fulham, if not potentially bigger. So
Right.
I'm not sure that it's certain that Seth Ridgen stays, but I do think that Fulham probably will have some confidence that they can that they can sign him to a new deal. Certainly, other players having signed on longer term to Fulham bodes well for Seth Ridgen, because it shows that the club are. Well, for Fulham fans rather, on the Seth
Right.
Ridgen case, because it proves that the club are ambitious to keep the talent in the club that they want to keep. They would have fought Everton hard for Kenny Tete. They would
Right.
have fought other suitors hard for Kearney. There will have been other interest in a player like King, if, for example, he was out of contract, which he wasn't, and they've kept him in. So Seth Ridgen will have interest. He'll know about it. His representatives will know about it, and don't worry about Fulham not knowing about it. They'll know about that as well. But they'll be confident that they can sign him to a new deal. And I think that he's a player that Fulham would definitely want to keep, clearly, because he's made an impressive last couple of seasons, hasn't he, in the academy?
Absolutely. Great stuff. Okay, one final question. And hopefully, Don, you can join me during the season. But again, I know it's early and Fulham not made any new signings, but you've talked about that you're confident that they'll come. I'm confident that they'll come. Question is, I think that they need to add quality to what they already have. I think they've got a really good foundation to have a good season. Based on what's going on so far, what's your early thoughts on the upcoming season for Fulham?
Well, I mean, at least two of the last three seasons, I think maybe 3 seasons ago, and then last season, there have been, by the end of the run-in, there has been a possibility of Fulham getting into Europe. And although it's not happened, it's at least been on the cards. Not sure I see it necessarily being on the cards next season, but I don't see Fulham falling away. I would say that they'll finish 12th to 15th, and I think 12th is more likely than 15th.
Okay.
But I think it will be somewhere within that bracket, which is probably where Fulham fans have been used to occupying. But we know that Fulham now have, in the last couple of years, have been able to add that final thing to the puzzle, which was being able to semi-regularly beat the biggest clubs. When Fulham finished 10th 3 seasons ago, it was a really impressive season, but they didn't beat anyone in the traditional Big Six. The last couple of years, they've beaten Arsenal, they've beaten Tottenham, they've beaten Manchester United, they've drawn with Manchester City. I think they've beaten Liverpool, haven't they, as well? So
yeah, yes,
and Chelsea. So those performances have started to come, and if you can pick up those performances, then the really important thing is not to drop stupid points against the lesser teams. And that, having sat in Marco Silva's press conferences for more than 3 years, that is the thing that really, really grinds his gears, is when you've put in an excellent performance. And it would grind any manager's gears who's occupying in that mid-table. Because if you've put in all the hard work to get the performances against the biggest clubs, and then you go and waste it by dropping points against a team that you've played better than and are better than on paper, there's nothing more irritating than that. So if they can improve on that, they can finish in the top half. As I see it, it'll be 12th to 15th.
Okay, fair enough there, my friend Don. Thank you so much. Before we go, I just want to mention that thank you everyone that has watched live. As I mentioned on the show, this show, the podcast version, even though I'm streaming live on several platforms, will be exclusive on the Cottage Talk Patreon page. If you're interested to the podcast version, please, I'm gifting 2 free months of access. Please do check it out. It's pinned to my X account, Russ_Goldman, and also on the Cottage Talk account. I'll also put here in the comment section. It's on the Cottage Talk Facebook account. So please do check that out. Don, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you coming on short notice to have a little chat about Fulham.
Thanks very much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, that's going to do it for this episode. For Dom Smith from The Standard, I'm Russ Goldman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk.